My next guest says what we're seeing play out is not a Marxist revolution, but something far broader. And it has everything to do with Donald Trump. Joining me now is Sohrab Ahmari. He's the op-ed editor at the New York Post and author of the forthcoming The Broken Thread, Discovering the Wisdom of Tradition in an Age of Chaos. Boy, do we need that. Sohrab, we've been led to believe that these are Marxist protesters. Now, you just wrote a new piece in The Spectator that makes a very different case. Who are these counter-revolutionaries?
I think there are elements in these movements that are from the hard left, Antifa, other such groups. But what I argue is, first of all, if you see New York, you're in New York like I am, you see a lot of it is let's say, middle class, upper middle class, the children of the bourgeoisie in some ways. Mm-hmm. But even beyond that, looking at who's actually in the streets, what's interesting to me is who is supporting this. I don't deny that there is a grassroots element, but I also see it mainly in a very telling way as a revolution of what you might call the laptop class or the neoliberal elite. People who are in the professional managerial class, big tech, large corporations, academia, quote-unquote, the expert class. These are all people who were threatened by 2016, which I think was the real revolution. That was the year that voters, both here in the United States, but also in Europe, voted for movements like President Donald Trump, for Brexit, other populist and conservative nationalist movements, and they turfed out a kind of global elite. For the first time, they turfed them out of power in decades. And they saw that as a threat. And so in the 4 years that followed, Raymond, they did one thing after another. You'll remember starting with a collusion probe. Then you had the farcical impeachment process. Then in Britain, you had 3 years of trying to thwart what the British people had decisively chosen at the ballot box, which was to leave the European Union. And I see this as one more element of that process. Everything else have been tried. An event happens, and I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, it's just a tendency of a certain class.
So it's a class war. I mean, you're really saying this is a class war. And the question is, why are big companies like Brook Brothers, Walmart, Netflix, why are they signing on to this movement, Sohrab? It would seem it would undermine their outcomes. It would undermine their well-being.
Again, I'm not so sure, because I think that the people who are making these decisions for these companies are not dumb. So they don't act against their own interests. So someone really has to ask, can anyone seriously believe that a revolution that threatened the interests of the American establishment, like you said, Walmart, Amazon, Nike, Netflix, the trustees of Ivy League universities, Brooks Brothers, for God's sake. If a movement really threatened those interests materially, would they support it? They wouldn't. I would argue that their material interest lies in things like easier trade with China. And so President Trump and movements like President Trump's in Europe, like Brexit, have thrown a wrench in their economic workings. And so
but
I
very
think
quickly, Sohrab, but the policing, the breakdown of policing and the call to disband the police and defund it, that doesn't quite fit this theory, though, does it?
Again, I think it does, because, look, some of the wealthiest people in my social circle are also the ones who are supporting defund the police, and it's because they can afford private security. They live in doorman buildings.
Doesn't affect them. Okay, it's always personal, Sohrab. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much. We'll have you back.